Hey, David Brewster here with the Scales and Tales, and this is the chromatic connection. And I know for a lot of musicians, especially guitarists, the chromatic scale is kind of a confusing scale. And it really is beneficial to study this scale. And I know a lot of players and students and people I've talked to and worked with, they tend to think of chromatic as like an exercise or something physical that they practice, to warm up their fingers or maybe get their picking, sorted. But really in music, especially if you're studying music or studying the fretboard and studying theory and scale and chord construction and things like that, and intervals, the chromatic scale is really important to understand and kind of work with because it's giving you basically, everything in the kitchen sink, or the keys to the kingdom. So it's giving you everything, all 12 notes in music. And I've mentioned this in a few episodes on this channel already, but I prefer to think of things in the easiest and most simplest way. And I know I've seen quotes and read, articles and interviews with musicians, and they've said there are only 12 notes in music. And I know when I first heard that, it confused me at first, and then I realized they're right. From A to G sharp or A flat, there are only 12 notes. There's not a 13th note. Part of this is going to relate to the fretboard mastery episode that I made. And I know when I first discovered this on my own, it kind of blew my mind, and I was like, "Whoa, okay, this is making the fretboard a lot easier." And then I started using this, idea or topic with students, and they seem to really like it too. So if you already know this, you're going to look at this and think, well, big deal. But if you don't know this or you haven't really thought of it this way, this might open your mind or open your fretboard. So if you're already aware of the open strings, repeating to the 12th fret, another thing you can think about as you're learning the notes on the fretboard is realize, like on a 22 fret guitar, like the Strat, there's the low E open and the 12th fret on the E. And those are the only E's that exist on that string. So there are two. There's a low one and a higher one. Now if you move up and go to F, you have an F on the first fret on a low E, and you have an F on the 13th fret on the low E. And that's it. And then you have an F sharp on the second fret, and an F sharp on the 14th fret, and so on. So if you start thinking of, single strings and really looking at the notes, technically the low E string played all the way up, consecutively to the 12th fret on the low E, that would be an E chromatic scale, like this. Okay? We basically started on E, and we played every half step until we reached E again, which there are 12 notes there. And we're not counting the octave again. Just basically think of that as one, when you reach the octave. So you can transfer that to every string, go to the A string and it's the same thing. Go to the D string, same thing. So we're really not trying to fool you or trick your mind. We're just getting you to think about the notes on the fretboard a little differently. This next topic is one way I'd like to think about music, whether I'm looking at scales and modes, or maybe I'm building chords, or I'm just dealing with a key and I'm looking at the notes, that are diatonic or kind of fit in that key. So let's look at like the A natural minor scale, like A Aeolian, okay? And if we play that, we're just going to put that in the fifth position here. But if we play that, it's going to be all regular note names, right? A, B, C, D, E, F, G, and then it repeats. So it doesn't use any of the accidentals, like the sharps or flats. So that... we covered that in the minor scale mastery of Scales and Tales. The reason I'm kind of going back to Aeolian really quick is just to kind of reveal how I really prefer to think of keys and scales and modes and music whenever possible. So if you think of the chromatic scale, most guitarists would think of it as kind of this reverse diagonal scale shape, where you're doing something like this. Which that is technically, a chromatic scale. It's basically not really that much different than doing this. There I just kind of limited it to one octave, but it's the same scale. Right? Now another way I want you to think about that scale, instead of doing this, kind of moving diagonal or reverse diagonal motion, I want you to lock into one position, or, partially lock into one position. And instead of doing it this way, we're going to move, kind of this vertical approach like this. Right? And that's also a chromatic scale. Now, if we look at that chromatic scale, which is, that's everything. If you think of a piano, that's every white and black key, right? So right here, there's a chart kind of showing you, A Aeolian, basically. And that's just the A, B, C, D, E, F, G spelling. There's the spelling of Aeolian, which has 7 notes, right? A chromatic scale contains 12 notes. So whenever I look at a scale or a mode, or a certain key like that, I notice the 7 notes that are present, like in Aeolian, the A, B, C, D, E, F, G. But then I also think of the 5 notes that are missing, right? You're targeting 7, but you're excluding or not using 5 notes, right? From that 12 tone or chromatic scale. So that's how I like to look at music. I look at it, I don't always do it this way, but I like to look at it like, I'm taking a chromatic scale and I'm removing 7 notes from that scale and building, this Aeolian mode. And so I'm not using all of those notes, right? I'm only using 7 of them, but the remaining 5 are still something that I can tap into and use if I want. I can grab one of those notes and replace it, with one of the notes in Aeolian, convert the scale. Maybe I could change it to Dorian, or I can change it to Phrygian, or, the major scale, or anything. So here's a chart basically highlighting the same Aeolian scale, but you can see like the notes that I've listed red are the notes that are kind of left out of the picture. So take a look at this. Now on that chart, I'm basically numbering the notes, 1 through 12. And this chart that I'm going to show now, it's kind of giving you like an alternate spelling or an alternate view of those notes. Because, we've got the root note, which is 1. And when we reach, A sharp or B flat, I prefer to think of that as like a flat 2 or a flat 9. I never think of it as a sharp root. You don't want to think of it like that. Think of it as, B flat. Okay, flat 2, there's the regular 2, which is B. We hit C, and that's basically a flat 3rd or a minor 3rd. C sharp would be the, major 3rd or regular 3rd. D would be the 4th. D sharp, E flat would be the raised 4th or flat 5. E would be the 5th. And this would either be technically, F or E sharp, I guess, like a raised 5th or a flat 6. And you've got F sharp, which would be the regular 6 or major 6th. G would be, the flat 7 or minor 7. G sharp would be the major 7 or, just the regular 7. And then you're back at A again. So it's kind of an alternate view of those notes and note names. So take a look at this chart. Then as far as using that information, you can think of what's there as far as the scale that you've selected, which in this example is Aeolian. So, as far as the notes that we didn't include, you could use them as passing tones, you could bend into them, slide into them, you could slide from them, into a scale tone. So, it's just a different way of looking at the notes, that we use in music, which, like I said earlier, there's no 13th note, there's only 12, so to streamline your thinking about this and to kind of view things differently, it would be really beneficial, for you to start moving this into other keys, or you could lock into A and maybe find other modes and scales, or you can move it around into other keys and try it G or, D or whatever key you want. But the important thing here is you're using that chromatic scale. You're kind of using it almost as a base of operations in a way, and you're seeing all of those notes, and you're taking what you need. Now you can relate this type of idea with like chord construction. You can relate it to intervals. You could think about arpeggios. I know when I, initially started learning modes and scales, I never thought about the chromatic scale. Like, I mentioned earlier, I always thought of it as like an exercise. I didn't really understand how to use it. I thought of it as like a way to make like carnival music or something. Like I didn't really understand, what it was for. I thought, well, I can play exercises, based around chromatic, or I can play Fly the Bumblebee or something. But I didn't really realize I can use it for mentally kind of processing music and music theory, scales and chords, and really understand, kind of how music works. Okay, here's something else to think about. And I know one of my instructors in school, addressed the class and kind of just said, okay, there's 12 notes in music, the chromatic scale. There's no 13th note, but why do, say, for example, why does Beethoven sound so different than, say, Metallica, for an example? And I remember I sat there and my mind was blown. I'd never thought of that before. Why does Beethoven sound completely different than, say, Metallica, as an example? But they're using the exact same information. The notes that Beethoven had, or Bach, or Mozart, or Paganini, or whoever, are the same notes that, say, Miles Davis, Metallica, Matchbox 20, or whoever you want to think of. It's the same information, same notes, but why does it sound so different? Now, obviously the instrumentation, maybe if you're looking at guitarists, a clean tone or a distortion tone or different sounds or effects, but that's not really what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the mental kind of a musical approach, what you do with those 12 notes. And that's what really separates, musical styles and musical ideas and, composers and songwriters and all this. What makes a good song, or what makes, this song better than that song. And it's all speculation. I mean, it's all kind of personal taste and personal preference, and, but it's something to think about, because we're really just talking about 12 notes, whether it's classical or jazz or death metal or funk or whatever. It all revolves around the same information. And I know from my personal experience, working with students, talking with peers, reading, about the subject and researching this, we're all working on the same material. It doesn't matter who you are, what style you're interested in, what you want to do with music. It really doesn't matter, because it's all related to the same 12 notes. We're learning the same information, but people mentally file it away and process and remember and use and recall this information differently. So it might be the same in the book or the class or the the presentation or the lesson, but what you do with it, as far as what when you stick it in your head, it seems like everybody kind of has a different thought process or a different filing system in their brain. And I know when I was younger, I looked at a lot of music theory and a lot of this completely different than how I look at it now. I was still learning the material when I was younger. And not that I'm a master or anything, I don't have any of this mastered, but I'm experienced. I've been playing for a long time. So I view music much differently than I did when I was younger, when I didn't have, as much experience. And through teaching and studying and just, kind of researching music, I've discovered, a lot of different things that kind of broke some barriers and kind of opened some doors for me. And that's what I hope, lessons like this are going to do for you. Like, it's going to help you think about things in a totally different way. Well, I hope this helped. Leave some comments and some feedback, and I can definitely build more from this chromatic kind of approach to music. So let me know if it's helped you, and please subscribe to Late Night Lessons, and I'll be back with some more lessons and material very soon. Thank you.